Welcome to the Fate Spun channel, a place where every story will make you feel, wonder, and hold your breath. Are you ready? Then go ahead. Story number 1. The HOA's worst nightmare. For context, I live in a suburban neighborhood with an HOA, homeowners association. When I first moved in, it seemed reasonable. Keep the neighborhood clean, no outrageous paint jobs, that sort of thing. But after a couple of years, the HOA board was taken over by one person, Linda. Linda turned what was a friendly set of guidelines into a draconian nightmare. She fined people for minor infractions like leaving a garbage can out too long, made arbitrary rules about the color of holiday decorations, and sent out passive-aggressive emails weekly. I mostly stayed out of her way until she decided my garden shed was unsightly. Now, my shed was tucked away in the back of my yard, barely visible unless you were actively snooping. Linda claimed it didn't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood and demanded I remove it. I refused. She started fining me $50 a day until I complied. I fought back, hiring a lawyer and arguing that her actions were baseless. While I was dealing with that, I started noticing how she was running the HOA like her personal kingdom. She had a few loyal minions on the board, and together they passed rules that conveniently didn't apply to Linda's property. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I requested the financial records of the HOA, which by law are available to all members. Linda stalled, claiming she needed time to gather everything. After several weeks, she handed over incomplete and messy records. But what she didn't know is that I'm an accountant. I spent my evenings combing through every detail. What I found was gold. Linda had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, landscaping for her yard, a new driveway, even a vacation. I compiled a detailed report and sent it anonymously to every member of the HOA. I also sent it to a local reporter who had covered HOA abuses in the past. The fallout was immediate. The neighborhood erupted, an emergency meeting was called, and Linda tried to defend herself, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But with the evidence laid out so clearly, no one believed her. She was voted off the board, and a new, much friendlier team took over. As for Linda, she wasn't just out of a position of power. She was sued by the HOA for misappropriation of funds and had to pay back every penny. I even heard she had to sell her house to cover the costs. My shed, by the way, is still standing, and now the neighborhood is a much happier place. Justice is sweet. Story number 2. The sweetest revenge. I always thought my marriage to Lisa was solid. We'd been together for 8 years, and while things weren't perfect, I never suspected her of cheating. That was until I stumbled upon her phone one night. I wasn't snooping. She'd left it unlocked on the couch. A notification popped up from someone named Jake, and curiosity got the better of me. What I found shattered me. Flirty messages, explicit photos, and plans to meet up. She wasn't even trying to hide it. I confronted her the next day, and she broke down, admitting everything. Jake was her co-worker, and their affair had been going on for 6 months. She begged me to forgive her, claiming it was a mistake, but I couldn't unsee the texts or forget the betrayal. I told her I needed time to think. In reality, I wasn't planning on staying. I was planning my revenge. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. Divorce was inevitable, but I wanted to make sure I came out on top. Thankfully, we didn't have kids, and the house was in my name before we married. But Lisa didn't know that. She assumed we'd split everything evenly. I decided to let her think that, for now. Next, I did a little digging on Jake. Turns out, he was married too. I felt it was only fair to let his wife know what her husband was up to. I compiled screenshots of their messages and sent them to her anonymously. She replied almost immediately, thanking me and asking for more details. We ended up meeting for coffee, and let's just say, we compared notes. She was as livid as I was and promised to handle things on her end. While Lisa continued to live in ignorant bliss, thinking we might work things out, I quietly moved money from our joint account into my personal one. Legally, I was entitled to it since most of it was my income. I also started gathering evidence of her infidelity, which would work in my favor during the divorce proceedings. The final piece of the puzzle was a party Lisa had been planning for her birthday. She'd invited all our friends and family, and Jake was going to be there too, under the guise of a work friend. I decided that would be the perfect moment to expose everything. On the day of the party, I connected my laptop to the TV in the living room. Midway through the celebration, I stood up to give a toast. I kept it short, thanking everyone for coming, and then said, "There's something I'd like to share with all of you." With that, I hit play. The screen lit up with the messages, photos, and plans she and Jake had exchanged. The room went silent. Lisa's face turned ghostly pale, and Jake bolted for the door. I left shortly after, letting her deal with the fallout. The divorce went smoothly, for me at least. With the evidence of her affair, she didn't stand a chance. I kept the house, most of our savings, and my dignity. Jake's wife left him too. Last I heard, Lisa and Jake tried to make their relationship work, but it fell apart within a few months. As for me, I'm moving on, but there's a certain satisfaction knowing I got the last word. Story number 3. The day the boss got a taste of his own medicine. I worked at a warehouse for 3 grueling years, under the thumb of the most tyrannical boss you could imagine, Mr. Carter. He didn't just demand results. He demanded every ounce of your soul. Long hours, no overtime pay, and constant berating. It was like he relished making people miserable. He always had this smug grin, like he thought he was untouchable. One day, I'd had enough. My breaking point came when he forced me to come in on my one day off, threatening to fire me if I didn't. My sister's wedding was the next day, and I hadn't even prepared. I begged him to reconsider, but he just sneered and said, "This job is more important than your personal life. Maybe you should think about that." I decided right then and there that he needed to learn a lesson. I wasn't the only one who hated him. Everyone in the warehouse had a Carter horror story. So, I started quietly gathering allies, people who were just as fed up as I was. Together, we devised a plan to hit him where it hurt, his reputation. Carter loved to brag about how he had built the warehouse into a well-oiled machine, and how it was the crown jewel of the company. What most people didn't know was that we were operating on razor-thin margins and barely meeting safety regulations. And Carter? He was fudging the numbers in reports to make it look like we were exceeding quotas. Step 1 was to document everything. We took photos of unsafe working conditions, kept detailed logs of the ridiculous hours he forced us to work, and even recorded a few of his infamous tirades. One of my coworkers, Lisa, had a cousin who worked in HR at corporate. She discreetly passed the evidence along. Step 2 was to make a splash. Carter was obsessed with looking good to his superiors, so we decided to ruin his facade at the company's annual review meeting. This was where all the managers gathered to present their progress, and Carter always treated it like his personal Oscars. We knew he'd be showing off a fancy slideshow of his accomplishments. On the day of the meeting, Lisa and I, disguised as IT support, managed to swap out his presentation with a special one of our own. When Carter confidently strutted up to the front of the room and hit play, the screen lit up with our collection of photos, logs, and recordings. The room was dead silent as his lies were exposed slide by slide. His boss, a no-nonsense woman named Ms. Delgado, was livid. She stood up midway through and demanded Carter explain himself. He stammered and tried to blame us, but the evidence was overwhelming. By the end of the meeting, he was escorted out by security. The aftermath? Carter was fired on the spot and blacklisted in the industry. The company conducted an internal audit and found more shady practices he'd been covering up. As for us, things got better. They brought in a new manager who actually cared about the team and implemented changes to improve working conditions. I like to think that somewhere, Carter's still seething, wondering how it all went wrong. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my job a lot more these days, knowing that justice was served. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel, like it, and don't forget to leave a comment. See you in the next video. Good luck!